Srila Prabhupada ki
Hare Krishna. Can't hear. Hare Krishna. Welcome to night 3 of our reading with Srila Prabhupada, or many of you are referring to as cookies and milk night. But 100% we're all here to really dive deep into the pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. We've just had night 1, which was going through his early life in India before he left on his momentous journey, where we read about in night 2, his journey on the Jaladuta. So on this series of Jaladuta to the world, we're here now on night 3. His first grounding in New York City, and who better to have along for the night than someone who's so instrumental in that journey, which is His Holiness Guru Maharaja. Thank you so much for joining us. I did press Maharaj if you wanted to read some excerpts from his book, which we'll read tonight, but Maharaj is here to listen, although perhaps if we read enthusiastically, maybe he might be so willing. So we'll dive through. There's a lot for us to read tonight. There's some thoughts and realizations and some prompting at the back, as usual, for us to consider as we read, coming up to Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja, his 60th anniversary. What struck you most about Srila Prabhupada's challenges during his first year in New York? That's the first one, and something we'll read about a lot tonight. So without further ado, we'll begin and hopefully make our way around the room. Those who want to read, just put your hand up as you come around and get to you. I've already asked Suvarna to begin tonight, so we'll just head over.
Based on extracts and summaries from the authorized biography Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, the memoir Miracle on 2nd Avenue by Mukunda Goswami, and other archival documents, articles, and transcripts. Part 1, A Stranger in a Strange Land, the Initial Struggle. After a harrowing sea journey that tested his health with 2 heart attacks, Srila Prabhupada arrived in America, not to the bustling metropolis of New York, but to the quiet, unassuming town of Butler, Pennsylvania, the home of the Jeep. His sponsors were a young couple, Gopal and Sally Agarwal. Gopal's father in India had arranged the visit, and Gopal had dutifully signed the sponsorship forms, never quite believing the Swami would actually arrive. When a letter announced his imminent arrival, Sally Agarwal recalled her alarm. "Honey, sit down, listen to this, the Swami is coming." They were, in Sally's words, simple American people, and the arrival of an Indian Swami in their small 2-bedroom apartment was a shock. Unsure how their friends and neighbors in the overwhelmingly Christian town would react, they initially arranged for him to stay at the local YMCA, visiting them during the day. Anxious to explain his presence, Sally contacted the local paper, the Butler Eagle, which published a feature article on September 22, 1965. In fluent English, devotee of Hindu cult explains commission to visit the West. The article, which referred to him as an ambassador of Bhakti Yoga, quoted his mission, to revive a people's God consciousness. The article referred to Srimad Bhagavatam as biblical literature and to Bhaktivedanta Swami as the learned teacher. It continued, "My mission is to revive a people's God consciousness," says the Swamiji. God is the father of all living beings in thousands of different forms, he explains. Human life is a stage of perfection in evolution. If we miss the message, back we go through the process again. He believes Bhaktivedanta lives as a monk and permits no woman to touch his food. On a 6-week ocean voyage and at the Agarwal apartment in Butler, he prepares his meals in a brass pan with separate levels for steaming rice, vegetables, and making bread at the same time. He is a strict vegetarian and is permitted to drink only milk, the miracle food for babies and old men, he noted. If Americans would give more attention to their spiritual life, they would be much happier, he says. Life with the Agarwals was simple, and for Bhakti Vedanta Swami, a period of observation and gentle introduction to the West. Sally Agarwal remembered him as the easiest guest she ever had. While she tended to her house and children, he would be perfectly content chanting on his beads. He would walk from their apartment to the YMCA each afternoon to work on his translations, returning in the evening for informal gatherings. At these gatherings, guests were fascinated, though they hardly knew what to ask. When one guest asked what he thought of Jesus Christ, Prabhupada replied, "He is the Son of God," adding that the guest was also a son of God. This response impressed the listeners, who saw that the Swami was not trying to convert them, but to encourage them to be better at whatever they already were. Prabhupada cooked his own meals, and it wasn't long before the Agarwals, intrigued by the aromas, asked to share in the prasadam. Sally recalled, "Oh, and we enjoyed it so much." They, in turn, showed him the wonders of America. It was such fun to take him to the supermarket. He loved opening the package of okra or frozen peas. He was interested in everything. It was fun to show him how I could open a can of soup with the vacuum cleaner. And and he was so interested in that. And we talked for a long time about that. He was so interesting. Though his hosts were kind, Prabhupada saw their conviction was that he had come only to finance his books and nothing more. After a month, having spoken at the local Lions Club and a nearby college, he knew that casual one-time lectures were of limited value. His visa was limited and his time in the quiet shelter of Butler was coming to an end. It was time to go to the heart of the nation, the world's greatest city, to see if the seed of Krishna consciousness could take root there. After a month, Sally Agarwal felt a protective love for the Swami and worried for him. She remembered their last moments together as Gopal prepared him for the bus journey to the metropolis. Gopal got a handful of change, and I remember telling him how to put the money in the slot so that he could take a bath at the bus station, because he was supposed to take a bath a few times a day. And Gopal told him how to do that and told him about the automats in New York. He told him what he could eat and what he couldn't eat, and he gave him these coins in a sock, and that's all he left us with.
A Swami in the City of Strife. Leaving Butler on October the 18th, 1965, Srila Prabhupada travelled to New York City, where he knew no one but had the name of a Dr. Ramamurti Mishra, an uptown Swami with an apartment on Riverside Drive. Dr. Mishra welcomed him, giving him a room in the 14th floor apartment overlooking the Hudson River. Dr. Mishra, who had been at poor health, later recalled Prabhupada's arrival as the perfect medicine. Open quote. His Holiness Prabhupada Bhaktivedanta Goswamiji really knocked me down with love, he said. He was really an incarnation of love. My body had become a skeleton, and he really brought me back to life. His cooking, and especially his love and his devotion to Lord Krishna. But there was a deep philosophical chasm between them. Dr. Mishra was a Mayavadi, a proponent of the impersonal philosophy that the ultimate goal is to merge into the formless oneness of the Absolute. Prabhupada, a pure Vaishnav, championed the personal philosophy of Bhakti Yoga, that the highest truth is Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the eternal nature of the soul is to be his loving servant. Their animated discussions, often overheard by Dr. Mishra's students, would sometimes turn into loud shouting arguments, after which they would again become friends. But for Prabhupada it was a great inconvenience. He had come to America to speak boldly about Krishna, but he was restricted. Dr. Mishra could not allow his students to hear the exclusive praise of Lord Krishna as the Supreme Person. After a few weeks, Prabhupada was moved from the comfortable apartment to a small, windowless room in Dr. Mishra's Hatha Yoga studio on West 72nd Street. Here, his profound isolation deepened. He would rise hours before dawn to work on his translations while the city slept. On the evening of November the 9th, 1965, as he sat alone in his room, the lights suddenly went out. It was the beginning of the great New York City blackout that plunged 30 million people into darkness. Unperturbed, Prabhupada simply began chanting Hare Krishna on his beads. When a man from Dr. Mishra's apartment arrived with a candle, he found Prabhupada sitting peacefully in the dark, reciting the holy names. His days were spent in a massive letter-writing campaign to India, appealing to his godbrothers and wealthy acquaintances to help him establish the first Krishna temple in America. He had found a suitable building on 72nd Street, but the price was $100,000. He wrote to his godbrother, Guru Maharaja, "I am here and see a good field for work, but I am alone without man and money. To start a centre here, we must have our own buildings. If you agree to cooperate with me as I have suggested above, then I shall extend my visa period. My present visa period ends by the end of this November, but if I receive your confirmation immediately, then I shall extend my visa period. Otherwise, I shall return to India." The replies when they came were not encouraging. One after another, his contacts in India expressed their regrets. The Gaudiya Mutt had no funds to spare. In his solitary wanderings in Manhattan, Bhaktivedanta Swami made acquaintances with a number of local people. There was Mr. Rubin, a Turkish Jew, who worked as a subway conductor. Mr. Rubin met Bhaktivedanta Swami on a park bench, and being a sociable fellow and a world traveller, sat and talked with the Indian holy man. Mr. Rubin said, "He seemed to know that he would have temples filled with devotees. He would look out and say, 'I am not a poor man, I am rich. There are temples and books. They are existing, they are there, but time is separating us from them.' He always mentioned we and spoke about the one who sent him, his spiritual master. He didn't know people at that time, but he said, 'I am never alone.' He always looked like a lonely man to me. That's what made me think of him like a holy man, Elijah, who always went out alone. I don't believe he had any followers." On January the 30th, the East Coast was hit by severe blizzards. 7 inches of snow fell on the city with winds up to 50 miles an hour. The city of New York offered warm rooms and meals for people living in tenements without heat. JFK Airport was closed, as were train lines and roadways into the city. For the second time within 8 days, a state of emergency was declared because of snow. As a lone individual, Bhaktivedanta Swami could not do anything about the snow emergency or about the international warfare he read about in the headlines. He saw these as mere symptoms of the age of Kali. Always there would be misery in the material world. But if he could bring Radha and Krishna to a building in New York, nothing was impossible for the Supreme Lord. Even in the midst of Kali Yuga, a golden age could appear and people could get relief. If Americans could take to Krishna consciousness, the whole world would follow. Seeing through the eyes of the scriptures, Bhaktivedanta Swami pushed on through the blizzard and pursued the thin trail for support of his Krishna consciousness mission. Seeing him from a distance, a tiny figure walking Manhattan streets and avenues among many other tiny figures, a foreigner whose visa had almost run out, we come upon only the external appearance of Bhaktivedanta Swami. These days of struggle were real enough and very difficult, but his transcendental consciousness was always predominant. He was not living in Manhattan consciousness, but was absorbed in dependence upon Krishna. Just as when on the Jaladuta he had suffered his heart attacks, his reading of Chaitanya Charitamrita had supplied him the nectarine of life. He had already succeeded. Certainly he wanted to provide Radha Krishna a temple in New York, but his success was that as remembering Krishna, even in New York City in the winter of 1965 and 66, whether the world recognized him or not. Not a day went by when he did not work on Krishna's book, the Srimad Bhagavatam, and not a day went by when he did not offer food to Krishna and speak on Krishna's philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. Bhaktivedanta Swami's efforts to garner support from wealthy or influential persons was also meeting strong resistance. A wealthy industrialist, Sir Padampat Singh, was only interested in funding a magnificent Indian-style temple that could cost millions, not a humble storefront. On March the 4th, 1966, the Prime Minister's office replied, stating that it will not be possible to assist you due to the country's critical foreign exchange situation. His last hope for help from India was gone. He wrote in his diary on March the 6th, according to Mayapur Panjika, today is Adivas Day of Gaurapanim. Devotees at Vrindavan and Navadvip are enjoying the celebration. I am here alone, without any devotee companion. But I have come here to serve the Lord and not for personal happiness. I am prepared to live in hell, even if I am able to serve the Lord. It was confirmed he would have to work alone.
Part 2, the first sparks, planting seeds of devotion, chanting to the four walls. Freed from the constraints of Dr. Mishra's yoga studio, Srila Prabhupada now had his own place, however humble. First, in the small office on 72nd Street, he began to hold regular evening lectures on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. His first audiences were small, consisting of a few people he had met at Dr. Mishra's, young sympathizers like Robert Nelson, and curious wanderers from the artistic underground. The room on 72nd Street was a narrow, windowless office, barely 8 feet wide. Yet here he began to systematically unpack the treasure house of Vedic wisdom for a handful of Westerners who knew practically nothing of the culture he represented. He sat on a thin pillow on the floor, his metal footlocker serving as a desk and lectern, and he spoke with an authority that captivated his guests. He began with the most fundamental teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. We are not this dull body, but we are consciousness. His voice was earnest, persuading, sometimes breaking with urgency. The setting was one of bare poverty, but his words were of the highest spiritual wealth. He knew they couldn't take it all at once, so he urged them to take whatever they could. Quote, so we are holding this class, and although you have multifarious duties, you come here thrice a week and try to understand. And this will not go in vain. Even if you stop coming here, that impression will never go. I tell you, the impression will never go. If you continue this process, chanting the Krishna name, you will practically see how much your heart is becoming clear and how much you are making progress towards spiritual realization. He was still discovering the best ways to present Krishna, exploring his Western audience, testing their reactions. He looked out at them one evening, his voice fading slightly in realization. Have any of you seen a picture of Krishna? Have you seen? Have any of you ever seen Krishna? Oh, no? In India, hundreds of millions worship Lord Krishna daily, but the ladies and gentlemen in room 307, 72nd Street looked back at the Swami blankly. Yet he was not deterred. His spiritual master had told him, even if no one attends, you can go on chanting to the four walls. And so he did. A student had donated a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and Prabhupada recorded his solitary bhajans and philosophical essays. However, things took a turn when one night someone broke in to Bhaktivedanta Swami's small room while he was out and stole his typewriter and tape recorder. When Bhaktivedanta Swami returned to the building, the janitor informed him of the theft. An unknown burglar had broken the transom glass, climbed through, taken the valuables, and escaped. As Bhaktivedanta Swami listened, he became convinced that the janitor himself was the culprit. Of course, he couldn't prove it, so he accepted the loss with disappointment. Bhaktivedanta Swami had lost his spirit for living in that small room, 307 72nd Street. Although some friends had offered replacements for his old typewriter and tape recorder, what would prevent the janitor from stealing again? Harvey Cohen, a freelance artist who had come to listen to the Swami at Dr. Mishra's residence, and his friend Bill Epstein, had advised Bhaktivedanta Swami to relocate downtown and had assured him of a more interested following among the young people there. It had been an attractive proposal. Bhaktivedanta Swami ultimately accepted the offer of Harvey Cohen to share his loft while he was away in California. There were two salient points. Firstly, the Swami had to share the loft with a David Allen, whom he had never met. And secondly, the loft was located on the Bowery. An electrician at the 72nd Street building warned him against it. The Bowery, he protested, was the most corrupt place in the world, a skid row of homeless alcoholics and derelicts. But Prabhupada had nowhere else to go. His new home was a fourth-floor walk-up at 94 Bowery, situated between two taverns and a flophouse. Downstairs, sleeping derelicts regularly blocked the entrance, and he would have to step over them to enter his own building. But his consciousness was transcendental. He saw it as Krishna's grace. As he later wrote, he never felt he was in danger. Everywhere, I thought, this is my home. When he moved to the Bowery loft, the musical kirtans became especially popular, as his new congregation consisted mostly of local musicians and artists who responded more to the transcendental music than the philosophy. One of his first new friends there was a young black man named Carl Jürgens, who was studying Indian religion and Zen Buddhism. He recalled his first meeting with the Swami. All of a sudden, I saw in this dingy alcove a brilliant saffron robe. As I passed, I saw it was Swamiji knocking on the door, trying to gain entrance. There were two bums hunched up against the door. One of these men had actually expired. I don't think I saw the men lying in the doorway until I walked up to the Swamiji and asked him, "Are you a sannyasi?" And he answered, "Yes." We started this conversation about how he was starting a temple, and he mentioned Lord Chaitanya and the whole thing. He just came out with this flow of strange things to me right there in the street.
An encounter in the loft. One of the young musicians who heard about the Swami was Michael Grant. Intrigued that an Indian Swami was living just a few doors down from his own loft, he decided one evening to investigate. He pushed past two noisy drunks on the stoop of 94 Bowery and climbed the dark, foul-smelling stairs, guided by a faint sound of bells or cymbals. Ching, 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 ching. He cautiously pulled open the door and shuffled quietly inside. The place was dirty and dingy, and the smell of incense barely covered the mustiness. At the other end of the dimly lit room, he could make out a few chanters, sitting cross-legged on a rug with their backs to him. Directly in front of them was a wooden platform upon which the elderly Indian Swami sat. His skin was smooth and brown, and he sat cross-legged and erect. He was shaven-headed, with a few long white and black hairs protruding from his long Buddha-like ears. He wore a beige turtleneck sweater and red horn-rimmed glasses. His eyes were closed. His expression was intense, brows knitted together in concentration, as he chanted the mantra repeatedly, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Singing in a deep baritone voice, he led the chanting while the group responded, playing on a small African drum tucked under his left arm. After 15 minutes of chanting, the Swami began to speak, his eyes still closed, in an authoritative yet plaintive voice. Michael listened, fascinated by the elegant, stately, and immaculate presence of this man in such plain, grungy surroundings. When the Swami opened his eyes and asked for questions, Michael, a self-described peacenik, posed a challenge. What should a good man do if he sees an injustice, like a young man beating an old man? Should he give in to a passionate desire to intervene? The Swami's answer seemed indefinite, speaking of acting from a spiritual consciousness platform, beyond the reactions of good or bad deeds. When Michael pressed for a clearer answer, the Swami finally replied simply, yes, they would interfere. The session ended, and Michael, expecting the Swami to disappear, was surprised to see him remain on the dais. Approaching him, all his planned questions evaporated. I have a tambura, he blurted out. The Swami smiled, and drawing his hand dramatically towards him in a welcoming gesture, he replied without missing a beat, then bring it. Conversations with the Swami. The daytime meetings with Srila Prabhupada were even more revealing than the evening lectures. Michael began visiting the loft during the day and found the Swami approachable and willing to speak for hours. During their first talk, Prabhupada explained that he had come to the West on the order of his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I am not master, he said. I am servant, preaching what my spiritual master has told me. I am not making up anything new. He spoke with a conviction that often startled his Western listeners. When Michael, trying to find common ground, mentioned the heroes of Indian independence, Prabhupada's replies were uncompromising. Gandhi was a rascal. What do you mean? Bose freed India. Who is Bose? Bose, Subhash Bose. He organized the Indian National Army. It was Bose who frightened the Britishers. He was prepared to fight, to turn the whole Indian people against the Britishers. So they withdrew. When Michael produced a photo of Nehru, Prabhupada dismissed him as well. He was practically British, another nonsense. This was not the gentle, all-accepting yogi of popular imagination. This was a teacher with a precise and powerful worldview, unafraid to challenge conventional thinking. He began holding informal Sanskrit classes, but his real purpose was to teach the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. He would write a verse on the chalkboard and then explain its meaning word for word. Ishva Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha. Krishna is the supreme controller. He has an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin.
The gift of prasadam. From his first days in New York, Prabhupada had cooked and shared prasadam, food offered to Krishna. He knew that this spiritualized food would purify the consciousness of all who tasted it. He cooked with the precision of a chemist, preparing many dishes with a gusto for eating. He explained the principle. You simply have to learn the art of dovetailing your desires with the Supreme Lord. Because everyone has to eat, so God wants to eat something. Why don't you first offer your food to God? Then you eat. But you may say, but if God takes it away, then how shall I eat? No, God will not take it. God eats, but his spiritual eating is such that, even after his eating, the whole thing is still there. So we shall not suffer a pinch if we dovetail our desires with the Supreme Lord. On the Bowery, he began to teach the art of Krishna-conscious cooking to anyone who was interested. Carol Becker remembered his classes in the loft kitchen. He was a teacher, always aware of everyone's activities. He watched everything and made sure everything was done correctly. He was very particular. And he would only eat what he cooked himself. Despite the incredible poverty that surrounded him, he was planting the seeds of a rich spiritual culture, one small offering at a time. Part 3, 26 2nd Avenue. Shall I continue reading or pass it on to someone else? A Home for a Movement, Matchless Gifts. The madness of his roommate, David Allen, induced by an overdose of LSD, forced Prabhupada out onto the Bowery street, as homeless as any derelict. He took shelter for a short, tense period with Carl Jurgens and his wife Eva, but it was an intolerable situation for her, and Prabhupada knew he had to find his own place. This caused Carl to take Prabhupada to Michael Grant, later Mukunda Goswami, who recalls the conversation they had in his apartment at 7 a.m. "So, how can we help the Swami?" Carl asked me. I was silent. The Swami, perhaps sensing my lack of concern, began to tell me about David's unusual behaviour. "David left the soap on the floor of the shower," he said. "This is dangerous. When I asked him to pick it up, he started ill-naming me." I was tired. A bar of soap and a little bit of swearing didn't seem like such a big deal to me. "In India," the Swami continued, "we have a saying, Guru Maharaja Vidya. You sit opposite a guru, learn from him everything, then you kill him. Move his dead body aside and sit in his place, and then you become the guru." He paused. "David is a very dangerous man." When the Swami and Carl left, I felt strangely alone. I felt I had to do something for the Swami, but not just because I told him I would. I realized suddenly that during the past few weeks, I had begun to feel I was a part of his mission. He had come to America for the purpose of spreading his mission. Michael took to finding a new location for the Swami. Having heard of the Swami's predicament, he searched the classified ads in the Village Voice and found a prospect, a storefront on 2nd Avenue. He, Carl and Prabhupada met the agent and Mr. Gardiner at the empty shop. Above the front window was an unusual hand-painted sign, a holdover from the previous tenant, Matchless Gifts. The name seemed prophetic. The storefront was small and plain, but behind it was a courtyard and a rear building with a small second-floor apartment where the Swami could live. The negotiations for rent were robust, as Mukunda Goswami remembers.
"Well, this is it," Gardner said, motioning us to sit down on the small ledge that ran along the store's front windows. "How much is the rent?" I asked. $100 a month. The Swami said, "Mr. Michael and Mr. Carl are members of our society, and they pay a subscription of $21 a month." That's not true, I thought. I wondered why the Swami said this. I wasn't a member of anything. And I certainly hadn't given any money to join. The only money I'd parted with was the $15 for the books. "So I'd like you also to be a member of our society." He held out his 3 hardcover books to Gardner. The agent smiled and took them. "Thanks," he said, starting to page through them. "Please take these books. You can be a member. It's $21 a month, and we can pay you $79 a month rent. You won't have to pay anything now." I began to see that the Swami was striking a deal with Gardner, and that his claiming we were already members was a part of this. I remembered him telling me that he had been a businessman back in India. "It looks like these books were a lot of work," Gardner said, looking genuinely. "Okay, thank you. By the way, I also have an apartment in this building for rent." The 3 of us looked at each other, surprised. "How much is it?" I asked. "You can have it for $85 a month." The total rent was approximately $164 a month, excluding utilities, and the small group of friends agreed to pitch in. The move from the Bowery was a safari, a caravan of 6 men loaded with Srila Prabhupada's things. It was the end of June, and a hazy summer sun poured its heat down into the Bowery jungle. Michael carried the heavy reel-to-reel tape recorder, and even the Swami at 70 years old carried 2 suitcases. He struggled with his luggage, past the restaurants, supply shops, and lamp stores, pausing to rest. He walked on, past the homeless man outside the Salvation Army shelter, past the open-door taverns, keeping an eye on the procession of his friends who struggled along behind him. As he finally approached the storefront, he could see 2 small lanterns decorating the narrow doorway. There was no certainty of what awaited him there, but there had been good signs that these American young people, mad though they sometimes were, could actually take part in Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. Perhaps this new address would be the place where he could actually get a footing with his International Society for Krishna Consciousness.
A family forms on 2nd Avenue. The storefront at 26 2nd Avenue, which everyone immediately began calling the temple, began the new epicenter of Srila Prabhupada's mission. It was here that the first real group of serious followers gathered around him, drawn by a strange confluence of circumstances. Howard Wheeler, a 26-year-old English instructor from Ohio State, had just returned from a trip to India in search of a guru. One day in July 1966, he was walking down Houston Street when he saw the Swami. He looked like the genie that popped out of Aladdin's lamp. They stopped and spoke, and Bhaktivedanta Swami invited him to his new classes. Howard rushed back to his Mott Street apartment to tell his roommates, Keith and Molly, about the guru who had inexplicably appeared in their midst. Keith, the son of a Southern Baptist minister and a PhD candidate at Columbia, was something of a guru to his own circle of friends. Wally was a bearded intellectual, well-read in Buddhist literature. Together they experimented with LSD, trying to use drugs to help their meditation. They all came to the first evening kirtan at the new storefront, joining a dozen other young men sitting on the bare floor. When the Swami entered, his aspect grave, he seemed like the Buddha in meditation. He took out his symbols and began to chant Hare Krishna. The effect was immediate and powerful. For these young men, who had boldly entered the turbulent waters of psychedelics, the kirtan was another chance to trip out, and they willingly flowed with it. The chanting swept back the world, and in its sound, even the incessant car horns and rumbling trucks of 2nd Avenue faded into the distance. Quickly, a daily routine was established. Keith moved in with Bhaktivedanta Swami and became his cook and housekeeper. The others from Mott Street, Howard, Wally, and their friend Chuck Barnett, a young jazz flutist, began attending daily morning classes in Swamiji's apartment at 6 a.m. There, in the intimate setting of his small room, he began to reveal not just the philosophy, but his own life and personality. Prabhupada was planting the seeds of devotional service. He engaged Howard, Harigriva, in editing his Srimad Bhagavatam manuscripts. When Howard offered his services, Prabhupada opened his closet and pulled out 2 large bundles tied in saffron cloth. There were thousands of pages, Howard recalled. It's a lifetime of typing, he said. Prabhupada smiled and replied, "Oh yes, many lifetimes." Slowly, the bare storefront was transformed. The boys built a wooden platform for Prabhupada, hung purple and orange curtains, and displayed his prints from India. When Prabhupada saw the decorated temple for the first time, he smiled broadly. "You're advancing," he said. "Yes, this is Krishna consciousness."
The Sunday Love Feast. One of the first and most enduring programs Srila Prabhupada established was the Sunday Feast. He announced it himself in July 1966, using a term that surprised his followers with its hippie vernacular. I was thinking of having a love feast with singing, dancing, and eating. No one will refuse such a function. The first feasts were held in his apartment, where he would single-handedly cook for 50 people. His new disciples would sit in his front room, making dough for puris and samosas, and he would move between the kitchen and the front room, supervising every detail. He taught them that food offered to Krishna becomes spiritualized, or prasadam, which means mercy. Mukunda Goswami remembers the first love feast. On Sunday afternoon, several people showed up at the Swami's loft. The lecture platform was out of sight and had been replaced by a big round wooden table that someone had dragged to the end of the lecture area. The table was covered with food of all kinds, some on trays and some in large, strange pots without handles that were pocked on the outside with what appeared to be random hammer marks. The Swami circulated around the room, smiling and talking in an animated manner with everyone. I stood to one side, unsure that I would be able to come up with any small talk. Moving through the small groups of people, he was no longer the sage, the wise man from India. He was an affable, indefatigable host. Not used to seeing him standing up, I was struck once again by how small he looked in comparison to the other people in the room. The smells coming from the pots were intriguing. I edged over to the table to see what the food looked like. The pots were full of various vegetables and bean dishes, a dark brown chickpea stew, creamed spinach with pieces of milk curd, yellow rice studded with peas, and an eggplant and tomato curry with chunks of fried golden potato. On a tray to my left were pastry fritters accompanied by a dish of rich-looking tamarind chutney. Beside it were a tray of pale brown sweets and a deep bowl of creamy dessert with strands of saffron floating in it. The Swami suddenly appeared next to us, handing us each a china plate. Rather than leaving it up to us to help ourselves to what we wanted, he served us each preparation. Throughout the evening, he moved energetically around the room with a pot under his left arm and a serving spoon in his right hand. "Take, take," he said, grinning and piling more and more portions onto our plates without waiting for us to say yes. "You'll like it, you will." I cautiously tried 2 bites of the chickpea stew when all of a sudden he was in front of me with another ladleful. "Take more," he insisted. Nobody refused. Carl looked up and nodded his head each time, mumbling through mouthfuls of food. Okay, you like?" the Swami asked me. I could only nod, chewing and swallowing. The whole event seemed to mean a great deal to the Swami. I didn't know why. I wasn't sure where any of this was going to lead. What follows a love feast? At least there was no dancing, thank God. The Sunday feast was a powerful form of preaching. Guests, mostly local hippies, would come for the free, delicious food and stay for the philosophy. The experience of taking prasadam was intense and purifying. One disciple recalled, "Swamiji and Krishna were giving us a taste of full spiritual ecstasy. Even though we were still beginners and still in the material world, before taking my plateful, I would pray, 'Please let me remain in Krishna consciousness, because it is so nice and I am so fallen.' I would begin eating, going from one taste sensation to another, the good rice, the favorite vegetable, the bread, and saving the gulab jamun for last, thinking, I can have seconds, and if I like, thirds. We would keep our eyes on the big pots, confident that there was as much as we wanted."
A society is born by the summer of 1966. Prabhupada was not just a lone Swami. He was the center of a small but growing spiritual family. He felt the need to give his mission a legal, formal structure. With the help of a young lawyer, Stephen Goldsmith, he prepared the legal documents. On the evening of July 11th, Mr. Goldsmith came to the temple to gather signatures for the incorporation papers. The signers were a handful of sympathizers, none of them yet fully committed disciples. But Prabhupada had a vision that soared to the end of the millennium and beyond. He was planting the seed of a spiritual movement predicted to flourish for 10,000 years in the midst of the dark age of Kali. He named it the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, or ISKCON. The 7 purposes he laid out in the charter were the same ones he had envisioned for his failed League of Devotees in India years before. His purpose had never changed. The society would systematically propagate spiritual knowledge, teach Krishna consciousness as revealed in the scriptures, bring its members closer to Krishna, encourage the Sankirtan movement, erect a holy place, teach a simpler, more natural way of life, and publish and distribute literature. The storefront at 26 2nd Avenue was the sole headquarters for this new international society.
The Swami's flock. With a legally incorporated society and a regular schedule of programs, 26 2nd Avenue began to attract a wide variety of people. Prabhupada was open and tolerant to all who came through his door. One evening, a short, middle-aged drunk man staggered into the temple during the lecture. He stumbled resolutely toward the dais where Prabhupada was speaking, and to everyone's astonishment, pulled a roll of toilet paper from his coat and plunked it down on the lectern. The Swami smiled at his strange guest. "Thank you very much," he said. "Thank you, thank you." Then he turned to his audience. "Just see," he said, "it is a natural tendency to give some service. Just see, he's not in order, but he thought, here is something, let me give some service. That is Dharma." The temple also began to attract more prominent figures. One evening, the devotees were surprised to find the famous beat poet Allen Ginsberg sitting among them, chanting enthusiastically. Prabhupada did not give him any special recognition, but delivered his lecture as usual on the 4 spiritual orders of life, brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas. Ginsberg listened attentively for the entire evening and later became an important supporter, helping Prabhupada secure a much-needed extension on his visitor's visa after the immigration department had ordered him to leave the country. When Ginsberg came to Prabhupada's apartment to offer his help, he asked, "Do you really intend to make these American boys into Vaishnavas?" Prabhupada replied happily, "Yes, and I will make them all Brahmanas."
Part 4, the revolution begins. From a storefront to the world, the first disciples, beads and vows. On Janmashtami, the appearance day of Lord Krishna, in September 1966, Srila Prabhupada announced he would hold an initiation ceremony. Before the first initiation ceremony at 26 2nd Avenue, Srila Prabhupada instructed that his students should begin chanting on beads. He explained that chanting on a strand of 108 beads, known as japa beads, was the standard practice for Vaishnavas in India. This method was not merely a counting device. It engaged the sense of touch, helping to focus the mind and deepen the meditative experience. The number 108 was particularly significant, imbued with deep spiritual meaning. Prabhupada taught that it represented the 108 Upanishads, the core philosophical texts of the Vedas, as well as the 108 principal gopis, who are Lord Krishna's most intimate devoted servants. Using these beads was a way to connect with this ancient and sacred tradition. Following Srila Prabhupada's instructions, one of the first disciples, Keith Kirtanananda, went to the local craft store called Tandy's Leather to purchase the shiny red wooden beads for all the prospective initiates. The disciples then began the devotional service of preparing their own beads for the upcoming ceremony. Prabhupada showed them how to string the 108 beads, teaching them to tie a double knot between each one. This was done so the beads would not touch one another, allowing the chanter to focus on one mantra at a time. The act of stringing the beads while chanting was itself a form of meditation, a momentous and devotional event as they prepared to formally accept their vows. On 9 September 1966, in the front room of his apartment, Prabhupada held a Vedic fire sacrifice. 11 of his followers, including Howard, Michael, Jan, Carl, and Wally, took their vows. He gave each of them a new spiritual name and a set of 108 beads, instructing them to chant a minimum of 16 rounds of the Hare Krishna mantra every day without fail. A central part of the initiation was the vow to chant a prescribed number of rounds on these beads each day. Prabhupada explained that his own spiritual master had instructed that anyone who failed to chant 64 rounds a day was considered fallen. This news initially perplexed the new disciples, as chanting 64 rounds would take the entire day. After some discussion, Prabhupada established the rock-bottom minimum for his Western disciples, 16 rounds a day without fail. During the initiation ceremony, the beads played a central role. Each of the 11 initiates handed his or her newly strung beads to Srila Prabhupada. He then held each strand and chanted one full round of the Hare Krishna mantra on them. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. As he finished chanting on the set of beads, he would announce the disciples' new spiritual name and hand the beads back to them. The ceremony, which involved chanting on all 11 sets of beads, lasted for over an hour. For the new devotees receiving these beads now sanctified by their spiritual master was a wonderful and profound experience that sealed their commitment to their new spiritual path. Things were going forward. Now there were initiated devotees in the Western world. A few days later, he performed the first marriage, uniting Michael, Mukunda, and Jan, Janaki. He cooked an elaborate feast himself and established another key element of his mission, the Sunday Love Feast, a weekly festival of chanting, dancing, and prasadam distribution that soon became a Lower East Side institution.
The sound that shook the village. By the autumn of 1966, Hare Krishna was becoming popular. Hayagriva called it the Hare Krishna explosion. Then came the day Prabhupada announced, "We are going to chant in Washington Square Park." His disciples were terrified. "You just don't go into a park and chant," one recalled. It seemed like a weird thing to do, but Prabhupada assured them, "You won't be afraid when you start chanting. Krishna will help you." And so they walked, a small band following their master through the city streets. Prabhupada, in his saffron robes and white pointy shoes, his head held high, created a sensation. A year ago, Sally Agarwal had been sure he didn't want to make any waves, but now he was making waves, walking through New York City, headed for the first public chanting in America. In the park, amidst the stylish, decadent Greenwich villagers, the tourists, the musicians, and the lovers, Prabhupada sat down on a patch of lawn. A policeman quickly ordered him off the grass, so he calmly moved to the pavement and continued. He took out his brass hand cymbals and began to sing the Maha Mantra. His followers responded, awkwardly at first, then stronger. Wasn't as bad as they had thought. Guru's crowd gathered. For the first time, Guru had come into the streets of America to sing the names of God. They had broken the American silence. This event led to another, even more impactful kirtan, the Tompkins Square Park, the heart of the Lower East Side. Here, amidst the hippies, ethnic immigrants, the drug takers, and the seekers, Prabhupada sat under a large oak tree and began to chant. The effect was magnetic. The park, which had been a chaotic pageant of disparate groups, found its center. The chanting became a new wave that everyone could take part in. Musicians joined in with congas, flutes, and guitars.
The famous beat poet Allen Ginsberg arrived and sat among the chanters, lending his prestige to the event. A reporter from the New York Times who tried to interview him was told, "A man should not be disturbed while worshipping." Prabhupada signaled for his disciples to dance, and they rose doing the Swami step he had taught them, a sedate, swaying motion with arms upraised. Others from the crowd joined in. The kirtan went on for hours. Afterward, Prabhupada stood and spoke, explaining the chanting of Hare Krishna was the sublime method for reviving our eternal blissful consciousness.
Stay high forever, a challenge to the counterculture. Srila Prabhupada lived and preached in a neighborhood where young people were desperately attempting to alter their consciousness with drugs. It was inevitable that in explaining Krishna consciousness, he would have to address the revered LSD trip, showing how the two were contrary paths. Many who came to the storefront thought that the chanting was just another way to get high. But Prabhupada thought that it was a purifying process to uncover one's pure consciousness, whereas drugs will only increase the material covering. One night, a group from Timothy Leary's LSD commune in Millbrook came to the temple. Their leader challenged Prabhupada, "If you haven't taken LSD, then how can you say what it is?" The Millbrookers smiled, thinking the Swami had been checkmate. "I haven't taken," Prabhupada replied regularly from his days. "But my disciples have taken all these things, marijuana, LSD, many times, and they have given them all up. You can hear from them. Hayagriva, you can speak." Hayagriva sat up and spoke out. "Well, no matter how high you go on LSD, you eventually reach a peak, and then you have to come back down. On LSD, we experience going up, but then we always have to come down again. That's no spiritual consciousness. When you actually attain spiritual or Krishna consciousness, you stay high because you go to Krishna. You don't have to come down. You can stay high forever." This exchange inspired a new handbill that soon appeared all over the Lower East Side, capturing the revolutionary spirit of the movement and his direct challenge to the drug culture. Stay high forever. No more coming down. Practice Krishna consciousness.
The seed has been planted. The kirtan in Thompson Square Park was a triumph, a turning point that thrust the humble storefront mission into the public eye. The next day, October 10, 1966, the New York Times ran an article titled, "Swamis Flock Chants in Park to Find Ecstasy," an event Srila Prabhupada deemed historic. More significantly, the popular underground paper, the East Village Other, ran a full-page cover photo of Prabhupada with a bold headline, "Save Earth Now." The feature article inside captured the spirit of the moment, declaring that the Swami had brought a new brand of consciousness expansion into the city. One that was sweeter than acid, cheaper than pot, and unmissable by fuzz. It concluded with a powerful testament to his success. In only 3 months, the man Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta succeeded in convincing the world's toughest audience, bohemians, acid heads, potheads, and hippies, that he knew the way to God. These were, as Srila Prabhupada called them, happy days. After a year of solitary struggle, Krishna had sent him men and money. And now he had a temple, a duly registered society, full freedom to preach, and a band of initiated disciples. His happiness was not the quiet satisfaction of an old man in his sunset years, but the beguiling joy of a spiritual revolutionary seeing his master's mission taking root in the most improbable soil. At 71 years old, he was like a young giant just beginning to grow. He had arrived in America just 1 year earlier, a solitary, penniless monk with a trunk full of books and a mission that seemed impossible. He had weathered the loneliness of New York winter, the indifference of his countrymen, and the madness of the Bowery, sustained only by his unwavering faith. Now standing at the helm of his International Society for Krishna Consciousness, surrounded by his first American disciples, he had shown what was possible. He had proven by the order of the spiritual master and the grace of Krishna, the sound of the holy name could indeed shake the world. The seed had been planted.
Srila Prabhupada ki. Really lovely. So that concludes night 3, Prabhupada's first years in New York City, and how nice it was to have someone who was so instrumental. His Holiness Guru Maharaja, thank you so much. Hare Krishna. We hope we can see you again tomorrow night for the next, which is night 4, the legacy. Is the movement that spreads following this, which is just amazing. The West Coast, London, the Beatles, and then onwards India, back to India, the White Elephants, and then the legacy that Prabhupada leaves us now. Heading of course now into the 60th year, something for us to all think about heading into Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja. Now, we have some thoughts that you guys can consider with another person tonight, so you can stay back and discuss them. We've gone a little bit over time. Thank you so much to everyone for attending. This is so many people for an afternoon night program reading about Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much for all attending. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. And tomorrow I have a special announcement. I'm just a stand-in. This is really all Dhriti's work in the background. Her and her gang, her posse, so she will be the MC tomorrow. It won't be me, thank God. Hare Krishna.